Hello, everyone, and welcome. Great to have you here. This is Explore Attack Surface Resilience GigaOm Analyst Insights on ASM, or Attack Surface Management. Thanks so much for being here. Today's webinar is sponsored by Palo Alto Networks and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Keith Ward. I'm with Actual Tech Media, and I am truly excited to be your moderator for this special event. But before we get to today's content, we do have a few housekeeping items you need to know that'll help you get the most out of this session. Starting off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the Q&A panel that you can see right there on your screen. Glad to hear where you're logging in from today. We see people from Denver, from South Carolina, from Dallas, St. Louis, Wisconsin, maybe some people who joined us for another event earlier today. I'm so glad to see you. So glad you decided to spend a little bit of time with us today. So the Q&A panel, which you've seen and you're already taking advantage of, is also the place if you got any questions for Palo Alto Networks today. You want to put your questions in there and we will get to as many as we can. Now that Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, and slide advancement issues, so you want to try that first if you're having any problems at all. If that doesn't work, let us know in the Q&A and we'll get right on it and help you out. Next place you're going to want to look is the handout section of the control panel. That's right next to that questions tab where you'll see that. You'll find a number of important resources, including a link to the GigaOm report you'll hear referenced in the discussion today. That's a really important thing to download, so get it while it's hot, as they say. They're going like hotcakes. In addition, there's a PDF about the Cortex Xpanse active response model, which you will also be hearing a lot about today. Now, also in the handout section, you'll find a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to our huge library of printed resources on technology topics. You'll also find a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events, including some which really might interest you. Check that out and sign up. All right, at the end of this webinar, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Now, you do have to be in attendance during the entire event to be eligible to win that prize, and the official terms and conditions of the drawing can be also found in your handout section. So enough of that. Now let's get to the main event. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today. On the line, we have got Abhishek and Bajagan, Dr. Gregory Heon, and Chris Ray. They're going to be telling you a little bit about who they are, and then we're going to dive into a fascinating discussion. Now, Abhi is leading the discussion, so Abhi, you've got the mic. Take it away, sir.
Thank you so much, Keith. Hello, everyone. We're super excited to talk to you about attack surface management, some of the key criteria that you should be looking for if you're in the market for an ASM solution. And I have Chris Ray and Greg Heon with me to talk to us over the next 30 minutes. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. So I am an analyst at GigaOm. Here at GigaOm, I cover a variety of security topics. My background, what led me here is worked everywhere in organizations, from the help desk all the way up to security architecture and CISO for a little while. So I have a broad exposure to real world problems, and I get excited about topics like this one where we get to dive into actual solutions to those problems.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Chris. Greg, could you introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, all. I'm Greg Heon. I'm the Senior Director of Product Management for Cortex Xpanse, which is Palo Alto Networks' attack surface management product.
Awesome. Chris, let's jump into it. In your research, what are some problems that you've seen attack surface management solve for?
Sure. So probably the biggest one is organizations don't know what their attack surface is. And I think that's pretty common. You can go and you can talk to a friend who's in the industry. You can talk to customers and in your perspective. I talk to buyers, and they all have a very similar story, which is we know we are in AWS, or we know we're in Azure, or maybe we're in both, or we're in Alibaba or Oracle, but that's the extent of their knowledge. They only know what they've been either told about, what they've approved and authorized previously, or what they've discovered through audit. They don't know about all the unknown stuff. So ASM comes in and provides a solution that helps shine some light in some of those darker areas and fills in the gaps of information.
Right. And Greg, these problems are obviously a result of some key trends that have been happening over the last few years. In your conversation with customers, what are some trends that have sort of led to this problem of organizations not understanding what they actually own?
Yeah, it's a good question. The biggest trend, and the reason that I think we've got a good attack surface management product in business, is that attack surfaces continue to grow. That seems to be the number one thing I hear when I go talk to our customers and talk to prospects is everyone feels like their attack surface is growing, and everyone wants a way to shrink it. In terms of why that's happening, I think there's some big ones I see. So the move to the cloud and the move to SaaS make it really hard to secure your information. I think employees working from home starts to eat away at the perimeter as well. But I don't think they're alone. Like I look at M&A, I look at Industry 4.0 and the kind of convergence of IT and IoT and OT. There's a really nasty network attack surface now, and we're here to help you understand it. We're going to do the discovery for you and then help you shrink it.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at some other things that have driven this, we talk about digital transformation. That was big in the 2000s, late 2000s, right? Mm-hmm. And then COVID accelerated it because of the work from home, because you couldn't go to the bank and sign documents anymore. You had to find some way to do this now digitally. So that expanded that. And then the other one I think is something that we're all familiar with and we're very familiar battling. That's shadow IT. Mm-hmm. How do you stop other teams from going out and using unsanctioned software or cloud services? And what happens when sensitive data gets in there? Right. Typically, there's no coming back from that. You don't know about it until somebody's telling you that you've been breached, and it's in this service that was free and had some data in it. With attack surface management solutions, that starts to get reined in a little bit, and the problem becomes less severe.
So, Greg, obviously these problems and these trends have led to some really serious challenges for security teams across the organization because they don't really know what they own. What are some examples of these challenges that you have seen out in the field?
Yeah, absolutely. The most common thing that I see is when I go talk to a CISO and I ask them, what clouds do you think you're in? Almost always I get their cloud strategy. And more businesses I talk to have one. It's very rare now to meet someone that's in a full on-prem mode, right? Some are going to be more reliant on SaaS. Some are looking more at cloud hyperscalers and thinking about platform as a service. But almost always they tell me, well, we're going to keep some stuff on-prem, and then we're going to have most of our stuff in AWS or in Azure or in Google or in Oracle, right? And then we know we have that one acquisition that is in this other cloud, right? And so they think of their strategy mostly as this kind of small single-digit number hybrid cloud solution, and they're looking for tools that can work across that. In practice, what we see when we go do discovery for these enterprises is that they're actually in 17 clouds, right? And so the cloud reality doesn't match the cloud strategy, and there's no natural visibility for a security leader or a security team or an analyst working on that team to guide the reality back to the cloud strategy, right? So I think of what we're doing partially as going and discovering really serious risks in those, right? And those exist, right? On that long tail of cloud providers, you have exposures that no one's managing at all, not even a little, right? There's no agent install, there's no network security, right? And so they are big risks, and often there is really sensitive company information or company systems that are exposed there. But I don't know, I think a lot of the problem is it's kind of an unknown, and everyone has them. And it's rare that I talk to someone that's feels confident that they know 80% of their assets.
Right. I like that phrase, unknown unknowns. I think it succinctly captures the need for attack surface management. Chris, do you now see this as more of a need to have or a nice to have? There have been some conversations, there have been some changes in the attack surface market. And given your conversations with customers and the level of challenge that they currently face, what is your opinion on whether attack surface management is a nice to have or a must have?
So it's somewhere in between. We're not all the way into the must-have yet for everybody in every market segment or business vertical or size, but there is definitely a transition because like you were just saying, Greg, when you go and talk to security leadership, you find out that they don't know what they don't know. They have those unknown unknowns. If we look back at the last 5 years, just abstractly saying the last 5 years, if a business has been founded or has grown rapidly in the last 5 years, there's almost a 0 percentile chance that it did so in an on-premise data center. So therefore, the last 25 years of information security engineering and architecture knowledge kind of goes out the window. You have to be using newer knowledge. You have to be using newer tool sets. You have to be using, I hate to even use the term in a webinar, but you have to be using cloud native security tooling. You have to use something that understands the differences here. And that's really where, like I said, we're in that transition period right now. You have some organizations still on-prem, moving to the cloud. You have some that are entirely in the cloud. You have some that are somewhere in between there. They need to bridge that gap with the legacy approach of vulnerability management tooling, the big names that are in that space that are going to be either they have to grow into this space because this is really the rapid maturation of vulnerability management. That's what we're talking about here, is managing your unknown vulnerabilities. They either have to grow into that space or the buyers need to look to somebody who started from scratch, from zero, and built a specific solution set for this space.
Right. So, Chris, so the reason why we're doing this webinar in the first place is to go over your extremely well thought and written ASM evaluative guide. Given that there are so many different companies or vendors in the attack surface management place, and there's also more companies claiming to do attack surface management, how do you go about this, deciding, this is a pure play attack surface management solution versus this is a feature of a much larger product? What are some key criteria that you used in sort of creating your report?
Sure. So I think there's a few areas to start there. One is to understand the table stakes. What are the key capabilities of just about every solution in this space? And we've talked about them, but we haven't really given them a name yet in this webinar. So, there's the table stakes. That's the continuous discovery of your attack surface. It doesn't run once a week or once a day or once a month. It runs pretty much around the clock and gathers up-to-date information. That's a table stake in this space. Managing the inventory of that discovered attack surface. So keeping track of it so you can easily refer to it. Another table stake. That's something all of these solutions should be doing. And then kind of getting a little bit deeper. You know what you have out there now. Your attack surface is known, but what's a risk? Where are your vulnerabilities? Where do you need to be spending your time? So identifying risks in that inventory. And then finally, managing the false positives, because anybody who's worked in the security space for a decent amount of time knows how noisy vulnerability management tooling is in the legacy space. Mm-hmm. High false positive rate, a bunch of informational alerts that you don't need. So there's an emphasis, a focus in ASM on improving on that and delivering fewer informationals. Just here's what you need to know. This is where your risk is, and reducing the false positives. All of those things I talked about, those are the table stakes. So now we move into, well, what differentiates the solutions? How do we determine feature play from platform play? Right. Generally speaking, this is kind of painting with broad strokes, but what I look at here is I say, how many use cases does the solution solve for? The more use cases it solves for, the farther to the right on the radar graphic it will fall, or AKA, the more of a platform play it will be. Now, with you guys, like a vendor like Palo Alto Networks, you're obviously more of a platform play because you have the deep integrations with your existing Palo Alto Networks. technologies and solutions. But you also solve for numerous use cases, more than maybe somebody on the left side of the radar, which is narrowly focused on solving for 1, 2, 3, or 4 use cases, or being applied in a very specific way to get a very specific outcome. Hopefully that helps answer your question.
It does. And as a follow-up, Chris, you have now put Cortex Xpanse from Palo Alto Networks as a leader and outperformer. I'm going to redo that, the editor. As a follow-up, Chris, you have now put Cortex Xpanse from Palo Alto Networks as a leader and outperformer 2 years in a row. In your opinion, what really distinguishes Cortex Xpanse and Palo Alto Networks from everybody else in the ASM market?
So in my opinion, there's 2 things here. ASM is a very new space, and it exploded in 21, 22. When I initially started this research, there was, I could find maybe 20 pure ASM vendors that really, truly did it. In this latest version of the report, we had over 100.
Right.
So that shows you how real this space is. It has absolutely exploded. The other, part of this is, well, let's look at the established players in this space. And it's a very young space, so established doesn't carry a lot of weight, but you guys are an established player in the space. So when we talk about how do you land as a two-time outperformer on the radar, we're looking at your comprehensive discovery capabilities. Remember, I talked about that as a table stake. Discovering the attack surface continuously. Well, how well can you do it? In this case, the solution does it exceptionally well. Another aspect of this is the active responses. And active responses is it's a, correct me if I'm wrong, a Palo Alto Networks name for effective automations, right?
Right. So
you have your active responses that reduce operator burden. When I say operator burden, I mean members of the security team. Looking a little deeper, you have numerous integrations with non-Palo Alto Networks technologies. That's a big one because ASM is about discovering the unknown. You're not going to have pure Palo Alto Networks technologies deployed. It just doesn't exist. So you need to integrate and get data from them. But then also for the organizations that do have a lot of Palo Alto Networks technology already deployed, the integrations with this ASM solution and those technologies are very deep. Right. So for those reasons, Palo Alto landed in the leader ring 2 times. Palo Alto landed in the leader ring 2 times in a row.
Right. Greg, one thing that Chris mentioned in the report is that the active response module, which is a bit of a feature that's unique to Xpanse. Can you talk about why you decided to build this particular feature and a little bit about the problem that this particular feature addresses?
Yeah, of course. So I joined Xpanse almost 7 years ago. At the time, we thought we had absolutely unique discovery capabilities. We thought we could discover more than competitors, to the extent there were competitors at the time. It was a lot earlier. Everyone kind of sounded like they were doing their own thing. It's a lot more converged now. But we thought we could discover more accurately and be current, right? Because these things change quickly over time. And that's been a focus for my team for years. The entire time I've been here, we've tried to push the bounds of complete, current, and accurate with our discovery. But the more I talked to customers in the last few years, the more clear it became that even with the discovery, even understanding what they had, attack surfaces were still growing, right? And so it leads to the natural follow-up question of what should we do about it, right? Are we an attack surface discovery product or are we an attack surface management product? And so we made the decision to start funding what we thought of as more management capabilities, not just tagging assets and categorizing them and making sure you understand them, they end up in your asset inventory, but actually going and fixing the exposures we find, right? So to give examples of what that looks like when it comes to life, when any attack surface discovery product tells you you have an exposure, you get told something along the lines of, you have a remote desktop protocol, which is a ransomware vector, exposed on some IP address. So let's say on 1.2.3.4, you've got RDP exposed. What do you do with that, right? Like that's some random external IP address. It's certainly not the name of a server. It's really hard to trace that back to an owner, right? And so we view our job as the ASM product is to help you not just discover that, which we'll do for you actively, right? But also manage it, right? So we're going to go look at your CMDB. We're going to go look at AWS. We're going to go look at your VM providers, your vulnerability assessment standards, your vulnerability management platforms. We're going to do everything we can to try and understand what is that asset sitting behind that IP address, who owns it, and how do you go fix it, right? And then to the maximum extent possible, we're going to automate that for you.
Hey, Greg, can I jump
So
in for a
if you
second?
need-
It's
Sure.
it's really easy for you guys to just kind of brush over how important and how valuable that is. But for anybody who's worked in this space, myself included, you know that taking that raw data point, an IP address with a vulnerability associated to it, and then reversing it and being a detective for a day or a week or 2 weeks, trying to figure out where that IP address is at, very, very time consuming. And so that right there, that super automated, just, hey, let's just distill this down to the absolute information that you need. That is why ASM and your solution has grown into what it is today, because it saves so much time.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when I talk to most customers, the initial thing they ask for is actually risk prioritization, right? It's really manual to fix it. So I have so much I need to fix. Tell me what the most important 10 are, right? And we do that. I don't want to dismiss that, right? Like in our product, we will tell you which vulnerabilities are being exploited in the wild. We'll rank accordingly, right? Like we're stitching in threat intelligence in all these natural ways so that you don't have to think about it. It just works. But at the end of the day, if we want to shrink attack surfaces, I don't think it's about hitting the top 10 exposures. That helps. But it takes down, like 15, 20% of the risk. If we want to actually drive risk down to a point where organizations are comfortable with it as they've digitized their business, I think we need to help them fix more. And that's really the approach with active response, right? Is that we want to level up however many analysts you put in an expander, whether you're talking about half an analyst, a team of 10, or a team of 100. We want to 5x your team, right? We want to make sure that they can get more work done as a group than they would without it. And so we view our job not just as discovering the unknown unknowns, which is foundational, table stakes, I think, as Chris said, right? And we think we continue to lead with data accuracy there. We'd encourage anyone curious to try it. We're very, very happy to run a proof of value for you, but also in our ability to help you fix it.
Yeah,
I think that's the biggest differentiator today for our product.
Got it. Thank you, Greg. Chris, what are some top use cases that attack surface management can solve that you've sort of uncovered time and again in your research?
So there's really two personas. If you're looking at this space from the perspective of a buyer, you have the large organization, which has a enormous attack surface, an enormous public facing technology footprint. They can't hire their way out of this problem. They can't train their way out of this problem. They can't spend their way out of this problem. They can't outsource their way out of this problem. They can mitigate effectively to some extent using those 4 methods, but they can't completely. And ASM can't come in and completely mitigate it either, but it gives them the tools to be able to decide how they proceed here. Instead of saying we have to trust a third party, outsourcing or hiring consultants, or we have to believe in ourselves and our ability to recruit and hire and retain enough, probably an army for most large organizations that need to properly discover their attack surface. That doesn't work. So what ASM does is you bring it in. ASM, you can do your discovery, you can do the mapping like we talked about, Greg, linking that IP address and vulnerability to some tangible asset that you already know about and where it's at and who owns it. That's a really, important use case for the large enterprise. On the other side of this, it's the smaller organization, the SMB market. And I don't mean a small business. I mean, these could be organizations with 5, 6, 7,000 users and maybe a tech team of 50 to 100. That's a lot of organizations right now, even smaller than that. Organizations down to a couple hundred users and a very small tech team with maybe a single, supervisor leader.
Right.
They all have the same problem. They all have to manage their public attack surface, but they are grossly understaffed. And then when they aren't grossly understaffed, they're grossly underskilled. So ASM comes in and it's able to apply those table stakes we talked about and help them, do the work that needs to be done that's otherwise falling off the plate.
Thanks for that, Chris. Greg, what are some business outcomes that you've seen customers achieve with attack surface management?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the fun parts of my job and part of what motivates me is actually driving to business outcomes. So as I think I've kind of hinted to a few times in this webinar, I care most about customers shrinking their attack surfaces more than having visibility, right? So I can tell you about one financial services company where, when we started working with them, we found 40% more assets than they knew about, right? And that meant that in total, they had over 100,000 assets under management that they were tracking inside Xpander, our flagship product. But the neat thing is working with them, right, we were able to drive a 65% decrease in high-end critical issues that we found, including taking over 250 insecure Apache servers offline, over 100 instances of insecure PHP, and then thousands of certificate hygiene issues and more, right? So one example, large financial services firm. Another Fortune 100 healthcare company, we saw a 14% decrease in their attack surface as they started to decommission these assets that we found. Right, so this company, very large, had over 450,000 assets within Xpander. And over the time we've been working with them, so far we've seen a 70% decrease in high and critical issues. Right, and so generally the pattern you see here, and I can list them off in every industry in the world and every region in the world, right, is that we're going to come to you, we're going to tell you what we see, and almost definitely we're going to find a double-digit percentage of assets you weren't tracking. We'd love to do it. Our sales process doesn't cost you anything. As we do that, with every single customer I engage with in a pre-sale cycle, we find something they weren't tracking that they're worried about. And the Xpanse team loves helping you fix it. That's where we think the value is in attack surface management, is in shrinking your attack surface, right? And we do that with all of our customers as we work with them hand in glove to make sure that they can be successful in actually reducing risk on their attack surface.
Right. I mean, that's incredible. That goes back to what Chris mentioned early during this conversation. It's just that customers know that there are things that they don't know about, and they know that this can actually hurt them, and they want to find that and then take it offline or decommission them. Chris, so for people who have listening to this conversation, what would you say are like the top 3 things that they should keep in mind when they're thinking about going out into the market and evaluating an attack surface management solution? Obviously, the report lays it out pretty well. It's pretty comprehensive. But what are the top 3 that come to your mind at this point?
So, we talked a lot about discovery, comprehensive, continual. Well, what does that actually mean? Mm-hmm. So when you're going into the marketplace, the number one thing I would consider is know your assets that you're aware of, because generally speaking, if you use virtual compute in a cloud somewhere, you're going to probably use virtual compute regardless of what cloud you're in. So just know that, hey, I need to be able to discover virtual machines or potentially Kubernetes clusters or whatever it may be. You don't need to know specifically what it is. You just need to know the asset type. And then ask very pointed questions of the attack surface management vendor. How do you handle the discovery of these assets? What information can you give me if you were to discover something? And then how do you attribute this discovered asset to my organization? Because a lot of times there's no direct link. There's no obvious correlation. So you need to ask, what's the logic driving this? That's really important to understand if you're going to place a lot of trust into it. Another one is the ability to automate a lot of these manual processes. So mm-hmm. Automation needs to be native. It needs to be inherent. You shouldn't look to an ASM solution that you need to then couple with a SOAR, security operations and security orchestration automation, tool. You need the automation engine built in, and then you need to know how difficult is this automation engine to use, what comes canned in the solution, what's available to me out of the box on day one, what do I need to build, and then how does that map to my currently manual processes. And then the other one I was going to just touch on is asking specific questions around how do you score risk, mm-hmm. because risk scoring is a very personal thing. It's different from every organization. The assets are going to have different criticalities to them. So getting an understanding of how a vendor's ASM solution assigns a risk score to a specific asset and the vulnerabilities associated with it, that can help you, again, build trust into it. Because like we talked about, we're discovering, we're doing manual processes, we're automating them, continuous discovery, tracking your inventory and your assets, and it's bubbling up to the surface, the things you need to pay attention to. You need to trust that it's using a logical process that makes sense to your organization.
Right. And Chris, in writing this report, you've obviously looked very closely at the attack surface management market. How have you seen it sort of change in the last 12 months?
It's, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. ASM is converging.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting merged into other similar capabilities. One could be continuous automation and red teaming part. Mm-hmm. You're seeing the merge into CNAP, the cloud native application protection platforms. You're seeing this sort of all of these cloud focused, public attack surface focused solutions kind of coming together. I don't know what they're going to be called in the future, but that seems to be happening much faster than it would in other spaces.
Right. And where do you see this market go in the next 12, say 24 months?
I see ASM becoming a feature of a larger platform set. I don't know if in a year it's going to happen, but most definitely in the next 2 to 3, 4, 5 years, you won't see buyers going out and seeking an ASM solution by itself. They will be looking for a solution that has ASM capabilities. Hopefully that makes sense.
Right. And Greg, what are your visions for how you see the ASM market sort of evolving in the coming years?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Chris. So like one of the benefits of being part of Palo Alto Networks is that we sit within the Cortex platform, right? So Cortex is Palo Alto Networks' platform for security operations. And we think of it primarily as a data problem, right? So we want to have all the right data with intelligent automations, both for helping you make sure the data is correct and ingested and normalized and correlated, right? But then also have that intelligence drive remediations, right? So we want to take an automation first approach to fixing it. And more we want to shift SecOps to be proactive instead of reactive, right? And so Xpanse is just one part of the Cortex platform. We also offer XDR, including detection and response across endpoints, across cloud, across network, across the email, right? Like you name it, identity, you name it, we help you detect and respond against it. We've got a full automation platform, and with XIM, we're seeing more and more customers choose to run their entire security operations off of Cortex, right? And so one of the nice parts of being part of that story, and we didn't really talk about it quite as much in this GigaOm evaluation, but I think it factored in with us being on the platform side, right, is that it just works, right? If you want a single pane of glass for your SOC, right, for your entire security operations, it helps to have all that data in one place, not to have a whole bunch of silos, right? And by committing to Cortex Xpanse, you're making sure you've got not just a unified front end for your single pane of glass, but a unified back end, right? Because all of that data sits in our Cortex databases and is used to help you run not just attack surface management, but your entire SOC.
Chris, as we come to the end of this conversation, outside of religiously reading the GigaOm ASM Evaluative Report, what's the one thing that you would recommend that the audience of this conversation should do if they're considering buying an ASM solution in the next 6 to 12 months?
Sure. So if what we've talked about here resonates with you, as somebody who has problems to solve in this space, probably the single best thing you can do is determine where am I spending my money now on similar tooling, and is it providing the level of efficacy that I need it to be? If not, start building those plans internally in your organization, start making those conversations happen, start looking at where you can pivot that spend. If you can't pivot that spend, then you definitely need to start looking at how can you justify green money? How can you justify spending or growing your budget to now include ASM? Because I'm confident that if we've touched on something that you're like, I didn't know that was possible, or hey, we're automating this, we're doing this manually internally, and I know it takes 15 hours a week for one person to do this. If any of those use cases we've talked about make sense to you, ASM can be an affordable, reliable, and effective solution to that problem.
Thank you, Chris. Greg, same question to you.
Yeah, I thought Chris captured it really well. One of the nice parts of the ASM technology stack is that we're looking everywhere. So we see the whole internet, and we need to see the whole internet to discover unknown unknowns, right? Because if we just looked at the things our customers told us to look at, we wouldn't be able to go discover unknown unknowns for them. because we're looking everywhere and because we can do this discovery from the outside in without customer context, right? We're essentially doing the reconnaissance that an advanced persistent threat would be doing. And we can show you that with no effort from you required, right? So everything Chris said, I think, holds. At the end of the day, our solution does cost money. And if you can't find the budget, we're happy to wait until you can. But I encourage you to try it. Come reach out to Palo Alto Networks. Talk to your sales representative if you have one. We'd love to work with you and show you what our platform can do. We think it demos better than any slides can really show, and the demo will be centered around your environment.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Greg. Chris, Greg, thank you so much for taking the time. And for those of you that are interested in learning more about attack surface management, you can read a copy of Chris's report at paloaltonetworks.com/Cortex Xpanse. And if you want to know more about Cortex Xpanse, you can visit the same link. Thank you so much for your time, and back to you, Keith.
All right. Thank you so much, Abhi. Wow, what an awesome presentation. I learned so much about attack surface management that I didn't know before. It was just an exceptionally informative session, and I really appreciate it. So, as they say on TV, wait, there's more. If you liked what you saw today, you need to really think about joining Palo Alto Networks on Wednesday, August 30th at 10 a.m. Pacific time, which is 1 p.m. Eastern time, for another special event. The unveiling of dynamic risk prioritization and investigation augmentation. That's a mouthful. But what the technology that will be discussed is super exciting, as it helps you dynamically prioritize attack surface risks with the latest Xpanse features. During the event, you'll also learn how to identify, prioritize, and investigate attack surface risks with real-world intelligence and AI-powered workflows. So again, that is Wednesday, August 30th, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern time. Join us and Palo Alto Networks for another great session. Should be a lot of fun, just like today's was. And that's a wrap for the content. But before we let you go, there's one more piece of business to attend to, and that is the Amazon gift card prize drawing. As I mentioned at the top, you do have to be present for the entire event to be eligible for the prize. And we do have a winner for today. So the winner of the $250 gift card is Ruben Brown from Georgia. Congratulations to you, Ruben. We'll be in touch ASAP to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Palo Alto Networks for joining us today for a wonderful presentation. I want to thank all of you for joining us and for spending a little bit of your day with us wherever you are. It's always a pleasure to be here with you. I certainly had a great time, and I hope you did as well. That concludes today's event. Now have a great rest of your day.